So on your screen, you have two watches. On the left side, you have a Daniel Wellington watch. On the right, you have a Patek Philippe Calatrava. Both watches are entry-level watches for the brands in which they represent. And I know most watch purists are probably having a heart attack of me comparing these two watches, but it'll serve well when looking at this example. The watch on the left, the Daniel Wellington, you can pick up for around $200. The watch on the right, the Patek Calatrava, comes in at $20,000. I know there's a lot of subjectivity when it comes to what makes a watch good, and I'm not gonna try to answer that question today, but what makes a watch valuable and causes its price to go up, that is what we wanna take a closer look at. All right guys, let's jump into the video, but before we do leave a comment down below about the watch that you think provides the most amount of value for the money. So every watch lover has a general checklist that they use to really determine the value of a watch, myself included in this. And I think the first thing to consider are the materials of the watch and the actual finishing of the watch. When looking at the materials of a watch, one of the first things to really examine are the precious metal that's being used for the case and the bracelet. And then on top of that, looking at the crystal. So outside the world of digital watches, every analog watch is going to be measured by these two things. So most watches are going to be produced with some sort of steel. That said, just because a watch says stainless steel does not mean that it is exactly that. Most cheaper knockoff watches typically use alloys that aren't stainless steel by definition. Steel has different grades, and each grade has its own composition of metals, giving it unique strengths and weaknesses. Some of the most commonly found grades are 201, the weakest on the market in protection against scratches and corrosion, 304L, the most commonly found grade in steel watches on the market, and then two more expensive grades of steel that are found in luxury wristwatches, such as 316L and 904L. In addition to the steel, you will also have even more expensive options, such as titanium cases in sports watches, as well as different variations of gold, such as white gold, yellow gold, and rose gold. Finishing on cases is also a highly noticeable aspect of a watch's quality. Noticing things like the curvature of lugs, beveling, and contrasting polished and brushed surfaces on bracelets and of the case itself are definitely indicators to check out for. In addition to watch cases and bracelets, there then is the crystal used on a watch. Although this does not elevate the price of a watch the same degree that a precious metal or finishing would, it still is a great indicator of quality. Just to provide a general breakdown of crystals, there's three essential types. First is plexiglass, or also known as plastic or hezolite crystals. These are the cheapest options and are found in most very inexpensive watches and do a poor job against scratches. Next, we have mineral crystals. Another example of this would be Hardlex crystals, Seiko's proprietary compound of mineral glass that used on a lot of their entry-level watches. This is a type of crystal that is basically a happy improvement of plexiglass crystals, and it will do a little bit better against scratches and things of that nature. And then finally, we have sapphire crystals. When looking at luxury timepieces, sapphire crystals are often preferred as a result of their ability to be scratch resistant incredibly well. That said, they are surprisingly not as good against blunt impacts as other crystals mentioned before. And just because sapphire crystals are generally on luxury watches does not necessarily mean that they're always the best choice for every watch in every scenario, but they are a really good indicator of determining value. So have you guys ever turned on the radio and heard lines like this?
It's a rolling, not a stop. Watch shit don't never stop.
So hard, got a broke clock. Rollies that don't tick tock.
What Jay-Z and Drake so eloquently pointed out are the difference between watch movements and the value that is associated with them, which is our next point here. In the world of watches, there are two main types of movements. One being quartz, watches that tick every second, and mechanical watches that have second hands that constantly move, or what is often referred to as sweeping second hands. A quartz watch is powered by an electrical charge and a small quartz crystal, while a mechanical watch is exactly what it sounds like. A watch powered solely by mechanics and is powered by a complex series of gears, wheels, and springs. Let's look back at the two watches we looked at earlier, the Patek and the Daniel Wellington. So the Daniel Wellington is a quartz watch, and quartz watches, although being incredibly accurate, are much cheaper. There's a lot of reason behind this. I've done a whole video about it. I will be sure to link to it down below. So when looking at these two watches side by side, despite the vast price difference between them, the Daniel Wellington is more accurate over a month period with its quartz powered movement than the Patek Calatrava is over a 24-hour period. There is a vast difference between quartz watches and mechanical watches, and despite the difference in just the overall accuracy, the mechanical mechanical watch is always going to be more expensive. Part of that is the novelty behind it, but also just the craftsmanship and the time that goes into developing the actual movement itself. Another thing to consider here are complications of a watch. A watch complication is any function that exists in addition to telling time, displaying hours, minutes, and seconds on a timepiece. As a very common example, watches often feature a date window. This is a great example of a simple but complication of a watch. However, if something as simple as knowing the date is not your thing, let's step it up another level. There's a watch called the Patek Philippe Henry Graves Super Complication. It was a pocket watch produced for a wealthy business executive in the early half of the 20th century, Henry Graves. The pocket watch features an astounding 24 complications, took 3 years to design, and another 5 years to manufacture. Some of the complications included are Westminster chimes, a perpetual calendar, sunrise and sunset times, a chronograph, and my favorite, a celestial map of New York as seen from Grace's apartment on Fifth Avenue. The piece sold for $24 million, and I think is a great example of what happens when you add all these complications to a watch. But that said, it's interesting how complications, something with negative connotations in pretty much any other walk of life with that word, in watchmaking really does mean value and more craftsmanship behind a watch. And finally, we have, unfortunately, probably the most impactful reason a watch goes up in value, and that are the 2 stamps on the dial, or the ones most commonly seen on the dial. On many high-end watches, you will always see a logo stamp or applied logo stamp, with most dials marked with the place in which the watch is produced, things like Swiss made. Brands with hundreds of years of heritage can tend to get away with charging more, especially when they descend from places like Switzerland. However, I think we are fortunately seeing this gradually start to hurt brands that simply expect to get by pulling on the coattails of their pedigree that took generations to develop, as countries like Japan, Germany now produce watches that rival that, if not surpass, that of Swiss counterparts. What you might also see is brands will limit the number of watches they produce of a particular model in order to increase demand. This is simple supply and demand economics, but it works. Take the Patek 1518 as an example. A watch produced in 1941 as the first perpetual calendar with a chronograph function. There were 281 of the model produced. Of the 281, only 4 were made of steel, and as a result, the price of these have went up, so much so that one sold for $11.1 million in 2016. However, whether you like it or hate it, brand value and exclusivity certainly are things that I personally cannot fault the companies for doing. If the market is willing to still pay despite increasing prices, then more power to them. But as a consumer, I think these last elements of value, such as location, brand, and exclusivity, need to be taken with a grain of salt. And despite a brand's reputation generally being a good indicator of quality, it's not a universal giveaway. So guys, I hope this was a helpful overview of value in watches. If you're still a little bit confused, because there's so many different watches out there on the market, and I'm not somebody that attests to the idea that you have to spend a certain amount of money on a watch. I think it's a very out of touch perspective to have, and I've done a whole just series of list videos on my channel of different price points of watches that I think are good value for money in those ranges. So if you haven't seen those, definitely would recommend it. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit that bell icon. Bell icon really helps out our channel, guys. On top of that, go follow me on Instagram, fill out the watch form down below. We give away a watch every single month on this channel. And then finally, if you want to support this new generation of watch lovers that we're trying to foster up here, go to our Patreon. Any support there would be greatly appreciated. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.